ICE raids, contractor stings, and job sites getting shut down. Is it all just propaganda, or are us real estate investors actually at risk? Now, I'm not here to talk politics. I'm here to find out if this can actually destroy our businesses and what to do about it. Now, in the 14 years that I've been buying properties, I always thought that if I was collecting insurance, getting my tax documents, and verifying licenses, that I was all in the clear. But lately, all this noise in the news has me wondering, am I in the clear? All right, but look, after hours of digging through news articles, I realized that I really don't trust any of that crap. So instead, I'm going to have you come with me as I grill ChatGPT for the 9 big questions that I came up with in my research. So, Miss Chatty Kathy, you are on the hook. And here's my first question. And guys, I realize that you might think it's a little bit weird, but the reality is this is going to compile all the news out there because news is going to be biased one way or the other. All right, so what I want to know first is, did Trump really strip the license from that trucking company? I think I heard a story about this undocumented truck driver who was driving crazy and 3 people died over it. And then I also heard that Donald Trump, whatever he did to take the license from the actual trucking company. So obviously the people who did that are in trouble, but the trucking company, that's what I'm concerned about.
All right, I'm definitely game to be grilled on those big questions. So let's dive into that first one. So the story you're mentioning about Trump and the trucking company license is definitely one of those news items that can get pretty tangled. I'll check the latest info for you so we can see if there's any factual backing to that claim or if it's just a rumor that's been floating around. Give me just a second. All right, so here's what I found. There actually was a report that the Trump administration revoked the license of a California trucking company after one of their drivers, who was in the U.S. illegally, caused a fatal crash. The driver apparently had some past issues like failing an English proficiency test and having a suspended license. So yeah, that story seems to have some factual mixes. It's not just rumor mill stuff. And it does mean that in at least one case, a trucking company lost their license over something like this. So definitely a relevant point to raise for your viewers.
Okay, so you guys get why I'm asking, because that's akin to us as a real estate investor hiring subcontractors, and you would think that they're the ones that are at risk, not you as the one hiring them. But that might not be true. We're like the trucking company in this. But ChatGPT, it sounds like what happened is the trucking company failed to do things that they should be doing. And that would be equivalent to, for instance, I've heard that we need things like I-9s and E-Verify. And of course, if you didn't do those things, you might be on the hook. Is that a similar analogy here?
Yeah, that's a pretty solid analogy. Basically, it's like you're the trucking company in that scenario, and those I-9s or E-Verify steps are your way of making sure you're not on the hook. So you're spot on. If you're not doing those things, you could be at risk, just like that trucking company. So it's a great comparison to help your audience understand why those compliance steps really do matter.
Okay, let's get into that a little bit deeper. I-9s and E-Verifies. What else am I required to do as an employer to make sure that I'm protected?
Sure. Let's dive into that a bit. So aside from having your I-9 forms filled out for each employee and using E-Verify to confirm their eligibility, there are a few other things you want to keep in mind. For example, you want to make sure you're classifying workers correctly, like whether they're truly independent contractors or actually employees, because that can affect what paperwork and protections you need. You'll also want to keep good records of any contracts or agreements you have with those contractors, and make sure you're following any local labor laws that apply. In short,
okay, well, let me cut you off there. I'm sorry. All right, so you guys who watch this channel, you know that I'm all about the one-person house flipping business or one-person real estate operating business, investing business. And I do not have anybody on payroll, so no W-2 employees. So that's what the I-9 and E-Verify is talking about, and that's a lot of what ChatGPT was saying there, is this is if you're actually trying to bring somebody onto your payroll. I'm not doing that. I'm only subcontracting things out. That is like the biggest part of the one-man real estate investing business is no payroll. only subcontractors. So there's two questions that come out of this. One is, can I accidentally make somebody a W-2 employee, i.e. have somebody who I'm paying as a 1099, however, the government would look at them as an employee? That's question number one. Go ahead.
Absolutely. That's a great question and a really important one. So yeah, even if you're only using subcontractors and paying them on a 1099, there's always a risk that the government could reclassify them as employees if certain conditions aren't met. Basically, if they start looking like they're under your control, like you're dictating their hours, the methods, or they're working only for you, then the IRS or state agencies might say, hey, this person is actually an employee. So the key is to make sure your contractors really have independence in how they do their work and that you're not treating them like full-time staff. So that's the first piece of it.
Pretty abstract there. All right. Well, my whole goal is to dictate what they do all day, every day. I mean, that's like the strategy is get contractors to want to prioritize your work over anybody else's. So I want some actual like concrete things. What are 5 things that if I did this, the government would consider them employees and not subcontractors? Write this down.
Absolutely. Let's get concrete about it. So if you want to keep them clearly as subcontractors, here are 5 things you'd want to avoid. First, avoid setting their daily schedule in detail. If you're telling them exactly when to show up and leave every single day, that can start looking like an employer-employee relationship. Second, providing them with all their tools and materials. If you're giving them everything they need and they're not bringing their own equipment or they're relying entirely on you, that can also make them look more like employees. Third, giving them ongoing or indefinite work rather than project-based tasks. If they're just working for you continuously without a clear end to the project, that could blur the line. Fourth, training them on how to do their job in detail, like you would train an employee. If you're giving them a lot of specific training rather than just letting them bring their own expertise, that can be another red flag. And finally, if they only work for you and they don't have other clients, that exclusivity can make it look like they're actually an employee rather than a contractor. So those are some concrete things.
And that's good. Those are good. That's what I know to be as well. And the thing is, if I'm correct about this, the way that would go down if we were in some sort of trouble is it's not exactly a checklist. It's more like a weighting system. Like, okay, well, these 4 things you're pretty, you're like doing 90% of, maybe you lent some tools and such, but for the most part, they have their own tools. And so you're like 90% on 4 of these items. However, you are telling them exactly what to do all day, every day. So they would look at that more like a weight than an actual yes-no checklist. Is that correct?
Yeah, you've got it exactly right. It's more of a balancing act rather than a strict checklist.
You're good. Thank you. Yeah. All right. That was one part of what we were going with when we were talking about the I-9s and the E-Verify. We were talking about whether, what would constitute an actual W-2 employee. I made it clear that I don't want any W-2 employees. I want to make sure that I follow the 5 steps to make sure that nobody looks at them as a W-2 employee, and I certainly don't want to bring them on. I do not want that payroll weight. All right, so now that we know we don't want any W-2s and we figured out how to make sure we don't have any W-2 employees, what do I need to do as a real estate investor to make sure that I'm protected from subcontractors? All right, so the way that I've always seen it is that I need to collect like W-9s from them, the tax documents that are legally required, their workers' comp or their workers' comp exemption, workers' comp insurance or workers' comp exemption, general liability policy, also insurance, and their like business license, or if they don't have a business set up, maybe they're working like as a sole proprietorship and they just have a driver's license, but I have to, or some form of identification of who they are. I was under the understanding that if I collect those things, I'm in the clear. Is that true?
Yeah, you're definitely on the right track there. Collecting those documents like the W-9, the proof of their liability insurance, the workers' comp or their exemption if they have one, and their business license or ID, that's all good standard practice. It shows you're doing your due diligence and treating them like an independent business. Now, is it a 100% guarantee that you're totally in the clear? Nothing is ever a perfect shield, but having those documents really does put you in a strong
Okay.
position.
Hold up there. I think you're going the wrong direction here. All right. So yes, that helps me make sure that they're not being treated as a W-2 employee. No, I'm saying that if ICE comes, raids my job site, and there happens to be undocumented workers there, not the subcontractor that I hired, but somebody that he hired, because that's what ends up happening, I think, to these people, is that they're paying a subcontractor who is totally legal, has all four of those things that I just mentioned, but that subcontractor goes and hires day laborers or whatever. ICE comes, raids the job site, takes, the whatever they do with those undocumented workers. And I would imagine that in that scenario, the subcontractor that I hired might be in some trouble. But does it come back to me as the real estate investor? That's what my viewers are interested in.
Got it. That makes total sense, and thanks for clarifying. So if the concern is really about what happens if a subcontractor hires undocumented workers down the chain and then there's an ICE raid or something like that, the question is basically, does that liability come back up to you as the real estate investor? In general, if you've hired a properly licensed and insured subcontractor and you have all the paperwork in order, you've taken reasonable steps to protect yourself.
Okay, so I want to say this as well. A lot of the subcontractors that I'm hiring, you mentioned that we would have a contract that states, no hiring of undocumented employees or illegal alien employees. All right. I specifically don't do contracts with contractors, which I know that doesn't make sense, but the thought process on that is that it's not like you're going to track these guys down in court and, get the couple $1,000s out of them or whatever. And so the other thing to do is to focus more on relationship capital with them, focus on relationship capital and removing any friction in the deal. People don't want to have to read through contracts. They don't want to have to write up professional bids and such. And so I do a lot by verbal handshakes and verification in text and video, which is what we do a lot. All right, but I'm not specifically saying, hey, this is who you should hire. And so does that mean that I'm liable in that situation? Funny thing is that if I told them who they could and couldn't hire, well, doesn't that go back to where if you're dictating what a subcontractor is doing, that makes them more like a W-2 employee? 2 questions there. Please answer.
Absolutely. Let's break that down. So on the first part, if you're not doing formal written contracts and you're relying more on relationship capital, handshakes, and just text or video confirmations, that's definitely a more informal approach. It doesn't automatically mean you're liable, but it does mean you're relying more on the strength of those relationships and the understanding you have with those contractors. As long as you have a clear record of what you agreed on, like in those texts or videos, that can help show that you were treating them as independent contractors. Now, for the second part, you're absolutely right that if you start telling them who they can or can't hire or how they have to staff their team, that can blur the line and make them look more like employees. So it's a good call to let them handle their own staffing
So once again,
that way you're not stepping into that territory that could make the government think you're beating them.
Okay, yeah. Specific thing that I'm trying to figure out is,
absolutely. That all makes
as a real estate investor, am I at risk? All right, and I don't think you actually answered that. Without giving a contract that specifically says don't hire illegal people, am I at risk as a real estate investor? That's the question, point blank.
Got it. Point blank answer. Not having a specific written contract that says don't hire undocumented workers doesn't automatically put you at major risk. It's more about your overall pattern of how you treat those subcontractors. If you're not controlling their hiring decisions and you're treating them as independent businesses, you've got a good layer of protection. So in short, you're not automatically at high risk just because you don't have that clause in.
Okay. Nope. The at risk.
Exactly. That's the gist of it.
When I say at risk,
in the grand scheme, you're doing the right things to keep yourself protected. Just keep those good practices going.
When I say at risk, I mean at risk of being in trouble with the government as it relates to hiring illegal employees. go ahead. Am I going to be in trouble as it relates to hiring illegal workers? And that's always the question. That's the main question we're trying to answer here. So go ahead, answer that.
Absolutely. I get the focus now. So bottom line, if your concern is about getting in trouble with the government, specifically for hiring undocumented workers, and you're not actually controlling who your subcontractors hire, then you're generally in a safer zone. It's really more about making sure you're not directly employing anyone undocumented yourself.
Okay, well, saying basically we're good there, but I'm going to get back into this. Okay, you were cutting out a little bit there. All right, here's my next question. I think that it's pretty clear that that puts you in a pretty safe position. There's a little bit of question about if you don't have the contract. So maybe you do, write a short contract that says that, and that way you're protected. That's your call as a real estate investor. Now, here's a big one. If I mess any of this stuff up, what is the worst thing that could happen to me as a real estate investor or general contractor, if that's what you are watching this video? What's the worst thing that could happen to me if a illegal worker gets found on a job site that I didn't know about, or maybe for some of you that you did know about? What's the worst that could happen? Fines, jail time? What am I looking at as a totally legal resident of the United States, fully licensed, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a big and important question. So in the worst case scenario, if an undocumented worker is found on your job site and it turns out that there's a perception you should have known or you were somehow involved, the main risks are typically fines and penalties. Usually it's financial penalties that you'd be looking at, especially if it's a first-time offense or if it's something that you can show was out of your control. Jail time is pretty unlikely for a scenario where you genuinely didn't know and you're operating as a legal licensed business. The authorities tend to focus on fines and making sure you correct any compliance issues. So bottom line, you're mainly looking at potential fines rather than anything more severe, as long as you're not knowingly involved. It's all about showing you're acting in good faith.
Okay, so first time fine, what would it be?
So typically for a first time offense, the fines can vary depending on your state or legal laws and the specific circumstances. But generally you're looking at maybe a few $1,000s in fines for a first violation. It's usually not an astronomical amount, but enough that you definitely want to avoid it. So that's kind of the ballpark of what you'd be facing if it's a first time situation.
Okay, and if you look out there in the news, this is a weird thing to think about. And, I was actually going to highlight this in the title of the video as a potential opportunity out there. But, it's not, I didn't think it was cool to think about it that way, because I know that there's some real pain out there for certain people. Of course, this video is about you as a real estate investor, what kind of pain you're facing. I'm not taking it lightly that I know that there are people who are facing some things out there. And I've talked to some of the people that I work with out there, and, I know things are happening. So not taking that lightly. It's also why I didn't take that angle in this video. However, I do want to highlight it right now if you're still watching. All right. So here's the first question that I picked up in some of these articles: is the actual job sites that are getting shut down out there by ICE raids or whatever, is that they're big commercial sites? Is that right? Like, have you found any situations in the news, and take your time researching if you need to, ChatGPT, that where it is like a residence, a flipper that is doing a house, doing like an interior remodel of a house, and there was an undocumented worker in there, and ICE goes and busts that small crew? Have you found any situations like that, or is it all big commercial? Beep, boop, 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 boop. Beep, boop, boop, boop.
So from what I can see, most of the high profile ICE raids tend to focus on larger commercial or industrial job sites rather than small residential flippers or individual home remodels.
Okay,
the big headlines are usually about
very specifically, have you found one single case of a small business house flipper or real estate investor who had a job site shut down?
So looking specifically at smaller scale residential or house flipping scenarios, I didn't find any clear news reports of a single house flipper or a small one house remodel project getting an ice raid that shut them down. Most of the examples that come up are indeed focused on larger commercial sites or bigger operations. So it looked like it's pretty rare, if not almost unheard of, for a tiny residential flip to be the direct target.
Here's where I'm leading, because I read a lot of articles in preparation for this video. What I'm leading towards is I did see where big commercial sites are getting shut down. And I even saw where basically some of the workers are asking for some sort of hazard pay because they're afraid that they're going to go to these big commercial sites and they're going to get shut down. That's true, right? I want you to confirm that, because I specifically don't want this video to be about any of my opinions.
Absolutely, you're correct on that. There have been cases where large commercial sites have faced disruptions from ice raids, and it's led to a lot of workers feeling anxious about showing up. In fact, some subcontractors have reportedly offered hazard pay to workers because those workers are worried about the risk of raids.
Okay,
so
and
you're not just sharing an opinion.
Before I get to my major point here on how this makes an opportunity, if you haven't seen it already, but in my studies, I did studying these articles, I did find this somebody getting interviewed, and they're basically saying that the thing that is causing this is that we don't have enough trade schools out there for, people for, specifically they said plastering and drywall and other things like that. Can you find that quote just for everybody's entertainment? This was like something, I think a school building got shut down.
So the quote you're mentioning is basically along those lines. In one of the reports that came up, someone was interviewed saying that a big part of the issue is we just don't have enough trade schools producing skilled workers in areas like plastering and drywall. They pointed out that the shortage is part of why some contractors end up using undocumented labor, because there aren't enough trained people available.
I want that exact quote though, not like plastering and drywall. Didn't they say that exactly? I'm trying to find it in my notes here too. The quote is, the company's CEOs cited a chronic lack of investment in training native-born Americans in construction skills such as plastering, carpentry, and roofing.
Got it. Thanks for sharing that exact wording. So yeah, that's the core of it. The CEOs basically pointed out that there's been a chronic lack of investment in training native-born Americans in those core construction skills like plastering, carpentry, and roofing. So that's the exact quote, and it lines up with what
Okay. I mean, guys, honestly, do you see somebody that going out there and going to trade school to learn plastering or roofing? Maybe to like run a big roofing business, but to learn how to roof. No, that stuff is handed down. And honestly, if you're going to go to a trade school, you're not going for that. You're going to go be a HVAC tech, plumber or electrician, something that is going to make some serious money. That's what you would do. That would be the smart thing to do. Now, I do think that people should get back to that, especially with AI and such. Like a lot of knowledge work will be taken, but being able to actually do stuff is going to be harder to find and more in demand. And, kind of a belief on life is you should be able to do stuff. All right. Anyhow, going back to what I was leading towards is that people are scared to go to these commercial job sites from what I've read and what ChatGPT has told me. And so those people still need to work. I read a quote that says about 1.4 million of 11 million people in the U.S. illegally work in construction. That's more than any other industry. That's according to the Immigration Policy Institute. Okay, now, and I'm not saying that you should hire people who are undocumented. What I'm saying is if these big job sites are in fact getting shut down or people in fact aren't showing up, these construction workers still need somewhere to work. So now they might start looking towards real estate investors for job opportunities. You might level up your subcontractors overnight, because these guys who work on commercial sites, they generally are more well put together, more organized. They have a different experience that could be really valuable to you as a real estate investor. So that's the opportunity. And Listen, I made the joke about the trade school and such. Honestly, guys, I don't care, and you shouldn't either, whether somebody is black, brown, red, green, or white. You're looking for somebody who gives reasonable prices and works their butt off. And I don't care where the heck you were born. If you're doing those two things, I have a job for you, and I'm going to build a relationship with you. However, there is the one caveat. They got to be legal. All right. And we just went through all the things that are going to tell you how to protect yourself. And it sounds like, unless you're being an idiot, you're probably not at very big risk. You may be at big risk of the W-2 1099 thing, and you should watch out for that. But here's one thing I wrote down here that I found this information. Americans consume over 34 gigabytes of information daily. I don't know what the heck that means. Sounds like a lot, though. And what that tells me is there's all kinds of noise out there. News is going crazy. Propaganda everywhere. It looks pretty scary. And after this conversation, take it for what you will, but it sounds like it's not going to have the effect that I might have initially thought. But here's the checklist that we came up with during, those questions is always subcontractors. W-2s are weight and stress. That's the solo real estate investor model. Number 2, always collect workers' comp or workers' comp exemption, general liability, W-9, and business license or driver's license if they don't have a business license. No day labor, only legit labor. Okay. Track compliance with these things. You collect those things, make sure you know their expiration dates, keep them in a spreadsheet. Pretty simple. Never pay ahead of work because you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes job sites do get shut down. I kind of snuck that one in there, but don't pay ahead of the work. If you've paid for a $5,000 job in advance and people leave because of this, well, you're in trouble. And keep and use this as an opportunity to grow your pipeline, your depth chart of great contractors, because that's really what you need in this business. Like I said, I don't care where they're born as long as they fit that one filter of they're legal to work with. Then that's it, guys. That is the business. As a real estate investor, the toughest part of the whole process is getting the work done, the rehab. And you're probably not out there doing it all yourself. You might be doing some yourself, but your main tool is the contractors that you work with. So invest. Build your pipeline, build great relationships. And really, we talk about it from the business side, but there's also an intrinsic side. Guys, these are some of the hardest working people I know are the contractors that I work with on a regular basis. That's some of the best relationships that I have. And there is a lot of intrinsic value in helping small business owners grow their thing as you're growing your own thing. This is a true situation where synergies actually work out. It's not one person wins and the other loses. No, you both need to win together. That's a great business model. When everybody can win, both financially and feel good about doing it. So that's what this channel is all about, teaching you guys how to be great real estate investors, great house flippers. House flipping is really the entry point into real estate investing, at least the way that I look at it. And so hopefully you check out some of these other videos. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Hope you liked the thing with the AI. Let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll do something else like this, or maybe all you guys hate it and I'll never do it again. All right. See you later.